Looking out at the window of the cemetery lodge, Jim shivered. The early February twilight was drawing in. The first stars appeared in the sky unfurled, and the snow was swirling. We'd better get around the grounds and lock the gates. One never knows. It sweeps harder, and I'll freeze to the bone. As he put on his jacket, the groundskeeper checked if the flashlight was in his pocket, pulled his cap down, slung the old shotgun over the shoulder, and stepped out of the door. Almost 10 years of living among the graves had made the old man a cynic. For example, if at night he noticed some movement on the territory, he didn't cross himself, but simply raised his gun. Thoughts of the other world had never visited the old materialist. The living were much scarier. Descended bipeds that, like a swarm of locusts, raided their protected territory. The burned bonfires and damaged monuments leaving around them vile traces of their stay. So, noticing a grey wreck on one of the fresh graves, he pulled out a flashlight and prepared to look for its owner. But the bright beam only picked out the nearby tombstones and deserted alleys hidden under old trees. There were no strangers. Shining the light once more on the strange grey object, he noticed a slight movement. One never knows. Someone left a baby. The old man hurried to the mysterious find. But as he approached, he cursed and rubbed his forehead. In the center of the fresh burial, covered with flowers, there was a puppy. Scratched out in an unnatural position, the dog gave no sign of life. The only indication that it was a living thing was the faint animal's breath. Breaking off a long branch, pointed it at the dog. "Hey, get out of here. There's no place to rest." But the dog didn't react. What's wrong with him? Jim took a step closer and leaned over the animal. Icy fur, closed eyes. The earth-smeared nose drew in a faint whiff of someone else's scent and buried itself in the nearest wreath. The guard waved his hand and began to climb out into the alley to finish his round. Coming back from the far side of the cemetery, which ran against the wall of the wild forest, he almost ran. A serious snowstorm began, which drove the old man, who came out in the light boots. As he hurried past the familiar burial ground, he squinted, hoping the dog was gone. However, the dog was still there, already almost covered with prickly snow. Jim stopped. "Screw you." He angrily spat at his feet and went straight to it, sinking into the snowdrifts. In the lodge, having placed the foundling close to the burning stove, the old man warmed his hands on a cup of tea and thought, "Yes, it all fits. That grave is of young Forrester, shot by poachers. I remember in the village they said that recently he and his wife bought an expensive puppy from the capital city. Only how can it be a puppy? This is a huge moose." Jim cautiously approached the dog. It had thick grey hair of almost wolf color, expressive light eyebrows, white mask of the muzzle, thick paws, bushy, curled back tail. The dog stirred warily and opened its eyes. Two evil eyes, black and bright blue, stared at the old man. He almost missed the stool. For the first time in his life, he wanted to cross himself. "Oh, God damn you! I don't believe how it glared." The legs themselves carried him to the phone hanging on the wall. 2 minutes conversation with a friend completely clarified the situation. After the funeral of the huntsman, his wife and the relatives held a wake in the village, and then left for the city. They would return only on the 14th day. No one wanted to keep a Malamute puppy in the apartment, which would grow in a huge dog. His wife also went to the city. The dog seized for the moment and ran away. "Where did you find it, Jim?" There was genuine interest in his friend's voice. "It almost froze on the master's grave." Dogs don't have as short memory as humans do. The old man hung up and looked at the dog, who was listening intently. "Well, stay here, Gray. Let's stick together. It will be much more fun, and we can always visit your master." The dog closed his eyes again and stretched out blissfully beside the warm stove. Now the old man's daily rounds were less painful. Gray would accompany him to the grave of his master, lay down on a fresh mound, sometimes howling like a wolf, and then they would return home together. But everything changed on a cold March morning. As usual, when they went out on their morning rounds, they saw an unusual fuss at the forester's grave. The 40th day, Jim understood, and looked inquiringly at Gray. The dog, that out of habit was about to run to his favorite spot, stopped and waged his tail merrily, whining. The old man smiled. "Shall we say hello?" They turned toward the funeral procession. "Now that the dog is recognized," thought the groundskeeper, "I don't want to lose my friend, but rightfully he belongs to these people." However, they were not welcomed at all. A young woman in black, probably a widow, glanced at their prancing dog, pursed her lips, and made the pair to stop. "Don't you think that the presence of a dog at the memorial service is inappropriate? And I don't remember you among my husband's acquaintances." The old man held Gray, puzzled. "We're here on business, and we don't want to interfere. I'm the groundskeeper here, and this is your Gray. Don't you recognize?" When the answer was no, they both quickened their pace and quickly disappeared into the undergrowth. Jim took a deep breath, sat down on a marble tombstone, and lit a cigarette. "Yeah, buddy, there is nothing more painful than betrayal." His hand sank into the thick fur of the dog, which rested its forehead on the old man's shoulder. From that time on, Gray never left the old man's side even for a moment. He would run quickly to the grave of his former master, trot back, and keep up with him all the way to the lodge. By the summer, the dog got really huge. It was hard to recognize the old puppy in him. He was a dog with a long, thick coat, but with the same incredible curiosity and cheerful nature, and got the same crazy colored eyes. With the onset of warm days, an avid fisherman awoke in the old man, and this passion, in full measure, was shared by Gray. They often made an early round of the territory, opened the gates, and after dark went to the river. The old man would sit on the oars of the boat, borrowed from a friend, and the dog would settle in the bow or stay running on the bank or in the catwalk. He categorically didn't like water and went swimming only after long persuasions or promises to treat him to a twig. But he could easily eat the entire catch of Jim. Natural intelligence and friendly nature quickly made Gray a part of the fishermen who came to the fishing hut. He was forgiven for loud barking on the shore and the theft of the fish he liked. It's hard not to fall under the spell of the grinning dog muzzle with naughty colored eyes. The day before, Jim began to disassemble his fishing gear. The dog, realizing that they were going fishing in the morning, seemed to break loose. On the evening rounds, he pranced like a young horse and ran headlong through the dark alleys. He turned the lodge in a mess, stole and drove a camp pot for a long time on the floor. He dragged Jim's rubber boots under the bed and refused to give them up. The old man was not angry with the young dog. He knew that in nature he would let off steam and be absolutely obedient until the next trip. After a hasty dinner, they went to bed because before the trip it was necessary to walk around the territory. But deep into the night, the old man was awakened by a loud wolf howl. "I wonder where the wolves come from in summer. Even in winter, they don't often come here." Jim shoved his feet into short boots, picked up a shotgun, and hurried out into the street. The sound came from the grave of the forester, and the groundskeeper fired a warning shot into the air. The howl ended on a very high note, and the shape of a dog appeared at the crossroad of two alleys. "Gray, how did you get there? What are you doing, bad boy?" The dog, sweeping the ground with its tail, almost on its belly, slid into the lodge. It was early July dawn, and there was no point in sleeping. Jim picked up the gear and a backpack, whistled to the hooligan, and went to start his old van. As the old man drove up to the fishing hut, he saw two parked cars. "Jack and Bill are already here," he noted automatically. "So we'll fish in excellent company." The dog stuck its shaggy muzzle out of the window and barked in greeting. The door swung open. A man appeared on the threshold, smiling. "Hello, Jim. Your loved one's in his own style. Let the beast out, and we'll scratch his withers." Released into the wild, the dog danced merrily in front of his old friends, and they rushed at him from both sides, breaking and trying to push him into the water. Jim smiled, threw the things into the house, and went to untie the boat. A loud splash and a short cry interrupted the merry scuffling of those left on the bank. On the very rapid of the river, Jim floundered helplessly, trying to free himself from the trapping gear that entangled him. The overturned fishing boat was already out of the way, and it was impossible to grab hold of it. The dog sprinted toward him, snorting at the incoming waves. With all of his strength, he paddled toward the middle of the current, which was carrying his master farther and farther away. The wild man, in a heavy canvas raincoat, quickly became exhausted and began slowly sinking to the bottom. Gray, understanding the situation, went into deep water, trying to grab his sleeve. Overcoming the natural sense of self-preservation, the dog plunged deeper and deeper, desperately helping himself with all his paws. He tried to keep up until the body touched the bottom. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to push himself to the surface. In a desperate rush, the dog, with the last of its strength, ducked under the limp, sinking body. He grabbed the hood of his jacket and against the current began to rise slowly. Through the water, loud shouts could be heard, birds could be seen floating overhead, and people's faces could be seen peering into the water. His lungs were bursting with hundreds of cold, prickly bubbles. The sun over the water turned into a huge bright ball and burst with a large number of painfully cutting fragments. Almost reaching the surface, the dog, in an unconscious impulse, pushed the body of the owner up and turning over on his back, lost consciousness, carried away by the current, began rapidly sinking deeper into the water. The body of the Jim unexpectedly appeared in the water near the boat of Jack and Bill. Franz grabbed the old man and with difficulty rolled him inside. While Jack was doing CPR, Bill rowed to the shores as hard as he could. The dog was missed only half an hour later, when the old man, fully recovered and drank tea, warmed by a fluffy blanket. The boats were launched again. The fishermen split up and went downstream, hoping to find the dog. But 2 hours later, everyone returned with sad faces. The guys rowed almost to the rapids and didn't find him. Time passed, hope faded, and people's faces quickly darkened. Jim begged not to stop, promised to give up all his savings, and asked for a boat so that he could take part in the search himself. But it was clear that Gray was no longer to be found. It was noon. The old man was sitting on the catwalk, holding an unlit cigarette in his mouth. A light breeze ruffled his gray hair, and tears ran down his wrinkled face. Completely devastated, Jim simply didn't notice them. He thought, lonely, of going back to the empty cemetery lodge where the dog had been gambling that morning. He remembered Gray's crazy multicolored eyes, his grin, so similar to a prickly smile. He thought about how he would continue to live without his shaggy friend, what he would tell the owner Forrester. The old man turned his eyes to the clouds floating over the river, and with a sharp movement threw the cigarette into the river that was stuck to his lip. He suddenly realized that he wouldn't have to say anything. There in the sky, finally, they were allowed to meet, the souls of the dog nicknamed Gray and his master Forrester, on whose graves Jim had found him as a puppy. The dog was able to repay for his rescue and sped off across the rainbow, catching up with the one who was dearer than anything in the world. Thank you for listening to the rest of the story. Subscribe to the channel, click the like button, and leave your comments. See you soon.